Why is it that most people only realize what truly matters when it's already too late? We spend decades chasing careers, building families, and ticking off society's checklists. But in the final chapter, when the clock runs out and life slows to a whisper, what fills the minds of those who've walked the longest roads isn't pride, it's regret. Studies reveal that nearly 90% of seniors share the same 5 regrets on their deathbed. Not just random regrets, but recurring patterns, repeated so often by those facing the end that they've become a silent warning to the rest of us. Today, I'm going to reveal exactly what those regrets are, why they haunt so many in their final moments, and, more importantly, how you can avoid them. Because these regrets don't come from rare tragedies or terrible mistakes. They come from simple, everyday choices. Choices so small, so seemingly harmless, that most people never question them until it's too late. But you still have time. By the end of this video, you'll see these regrets with new eyes. You'll understand how to recognize the warning signs in your own life, and you'll know what it takes to break free while you still can. So stay with me until the very end, because this might be the most important conversation you've ever heard about aging, wisdom, and the fight for a life without regrets. And tell me, are you ready to face the truth most people run from their entire lives? Comment number 1 if you're ready. The first most common mistake is neglecting health until it's too late. It's a slow betrayal, one that creeps in, barely noticeable until the body you once trusted becomes a prison. For most, the regret doesn't come from one catastrophic illness. It comes from years of small choices that felt harmless at the time. Edward never worried much about his health. In his younger years, he was too busy building his empire to care about what he ate or how little he slept. Fast food lunches, skipped checkups, and late-night deals became his norm. He told himself he'd slow down eventually. Exercise? That was for retirement. Vegetables? He'd get around to it. But time, as it always does, ran out faster than he expected. By the time Edward was ready to care about his health, his body was no longer willing to cooperate. The first heart attack hit at 67. Diabetes followed. His joints ached. His energy vanished. Doctors warned him it wasn't just aging. It was years of neglect catching up all at once. Now, even simple things exhaust him. Stairs feel like mountains. Long walks are impossible. And every prescription is a bitter reminder of what he traded for success. Frank, on the other hand, made a different choice, one that seemed insignificant back then but saved his life later. In his 30s, he started walking every morning, just a mile at first, then 2. By his 50s, it was as natural as brushing his teeth. He skipped sodas, cooked his own meals, and kept his doctor's appointments. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood the truth long before most people do. You don't own your health. You borrow it from your future. Today, Frank still moves with ease. His mornings begin with a brisk 5-mile walk, the cold air filling his lungs, his body strong enough to carry him. His blood pressure, perfect. His mind, clear. And when he looks at his children and grandchildren, he knows. His choices bought him these extra years. Science is brutally clear about this. Studies from Harvard's School of Public Health show that simple habits, like walking 30 minutes a day, eating a balanced diet, and maintaining a healthy weight, can add more than a decade to your life expectancy. But the key is starting before you think you need to, because no one regrets the workout they did. The regret comes later, when you realize you'd trade every dollar, every success, just to have your strength back. So ask yourself, are you betting against your future or investing in it while there's still time? The second most common mistake is prioritizing work over family and friendships. No one starts out planning to sacrifice the people they love. But the years slip by, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, work takes the front seat. The meetings, the deadlines, the goals, they consume your best hours, leaving only scraps for those waiting at home. For Edward, success was everything. He built his real estate empire from nothing, fueled by the belief that providing for his family meant chasing bigger deals, bigger paychecks. Holidays were missed, anniversaries forgotten, and weekends became just another extension of the work week. He told himself there would be time later, time to make it right, time to slow down. But there wasn't. By the time Edward realized what he'd done, the damage was irreversible. His marriage ended quietly, worn down by years of absence. His children learned not to expect him at dinner, and his friends, those old childhood companions, stopped calling, tired of being second place. Now, Edward sits alone in his silent house. Wealthy, yes, but with no one left to share it. He doesn't talk about it much, but when the holidays come and no one walks through that door, the regret is unbearable. Frank's story is different. Frank loved his job, but he always understood a simple truth. No amount of success can replace the moments you miss with the people you love. He chose to teach because it allowed him to be home by 5, to coach his son's little league games, to sit at the dinner table every night. Promotions were offered. More money, more prestige. He turned most of them down, because Frank knew what most people forget. You can always make more money, but you can't buy back time. Now, in his 80s, Frank reaps what he sowed. His children visit often, not out of duty, but because they genuinely want to be there. His grandchildren know him, not as a distant figure, but as part of every milestone, every memory. And his friends? They're still around. Weekly coffee meetups, quiet afternoons in the park, laughter that fills the air like it always did. And the science, it agrees. A landmark study from Harvard, spanning over 80 years, found that the single greatest predictor of happiness and health in old age wasn't money or success. It was the quality of close relationships. The people who prioritized connections lived longer, healthier, and far happier lives. Edward didn't know this until it was too late. Frank lived it every single day. And you still have a choice. The third most common mistake is hiding emotions and fearing vulnerability. As children, we're taught that strength means silence, that emotions make us weak, and so we grow up learning to swallow our feelings, to hold back the words that matter most. Until one day, we realize the things we left unsaid are the very things that haunt us. Edward lived his entire life behind that mask. He was the tough one, the provider, the man who solved problems but never shared his own. He believed vulnerability was dangerous, a crack in the armor. So he kept his fears, his dreams, and even his love locked away, convinced that actions alone would speak for him. But they didn't. His wife, exhausted from years of guessing how he felt, drifted further away. His children learned early that "I love you" wasn't something their father said, and his friendships remained shallow, safe but empty. Now, Edward sits surrounded by memories of people who once loved him, but never really knew him. He wonders what might have been different if he'd just learned to say the words that mattered, when they still mattered. Frank took another path. Maybe it was his years as a teacher. Maybe it was just who he was. But Frank understood that real strength comes from connection, and connection comes from honesty. He told his wife he loved her every day. He shared his fears, his hopes, even his regrets. He apologized when he was wrong and forgave without needing to be asked. Because of that, Frank's relationships grew deeper with every passing year. His home was filled with laughter, tears, and conversations that lasted late into the night. He never wondered if his family knew how he felt. They did, because he told them. And science, once again, backs him up. Psychologists have long known that emotional suppression increases the risk of depression, anxiety, and even heart disease. A study from the University of Texas found that people who regularly express their emotions live longer, healthier lives. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's medicine. But Edward learned that lesson too late. Now, his unspoken words hang heavy in the air, like ghosts he can never lay to rest. Frank sleeps easy, knowing there's nothing left unsaid. What about you? The fourth most common mistake is ignoring passions and dreams outside of work. Somewhere along the journey, people forget the things that once lit them up. The hobbies, the dreams, the quiet passions that made them feel alive. They tell themselves it's childish, or that there's just no time. And slowly, the parts of them that mattered most begin to wither. Edward always had dreams beyond the office. As a young man, he loved music. He played the piano beautifully, until one day he stopped. Business took over. Deals, deadlines, profits, they became his life. The piano gathered dust in the corner until even looking at it felt like a reminder of who he used to be. Every time he thought about returning to it, he heard the same whisper. Later, when things slowed down. But they never did. Retirement came, but by then his hands were too stiff, his mind too clouded. And the music, it was gone. A dream postponed, until it became a regret. Frank lived differently. He understood something most people miss. Our passions are not luxuries. They are necessities. They are what keep the spirit alive long after the body begins to slow. So, even as a busy teacher, Frank carved out time for the things he loved. Gardening, playing his old guitar, volunteering at the local library. They weren't grand ambitions, just quiet, steady joys that gave his days meaning. Now, in his 80s, Frank's garden is still blooming. His hands still know the shape of his guitar. He wakes up every morning with something to look forward to, not because he's trying to fill the silence, but because his life was always full of the things that mattered most. Research backs this up. A study published in the Journal of Aging and Health found that seniors who maintained hobbies and pursued passions were significantly less likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, or cognitive decline. Passions don't just fill time. They protect the mind, the body, and the soul. Edward didn't know that. By the time he realized what he'd lost, it was already too late. Frank always knew, which is why, even now, his days are full, not just of memories, but of purpose. Ask yourself, what dream have you left waiting? The fifth most common mistake is refusing to plan for the final years. Death feels distant until it isn't. And yet, most people live as if tomorrow is promised, avoiding the uncomfortable truth that one day, everything we own, everything we've built, will be left behind. The mistake isn't death itself, it's failing to prepare for it. And the price is paid not by us, but by those we love. Edward avoided the conversation for decades. Estate planning, wills, healthcare directives, it all felt morbid, unnecessary. He told himself there was plenty of time. Besides, he was still strong, still sharp. Why think about the end? But when his health failed, it happened fast. The first heart attack was a wake-up call, but there was no plan. No will, no conversations with his children about what he wanted. So, when the decisions had to be made, his family was left guessing. Arguments broke out. Siblings drifted apart. The wealth he worked so hard for became a source of pain, not comfort. Now, Edward lives with that regret, not because of the money, but because he made his family carry a burden that was never theirs to bear. Frank chose differently. Years ago, when he was still healthy, Frank sat down with his wife and his children. They talked about the hard things, what he wanted when the time came, how his modest savings should be handled, how he hoped to be remembered. There were tears. There was discomfort. But when the conversation was over, there was peace. Today, Frank doesn't worry about being a burden. His family knows his wishes. His finances are simple, his will clear, and, most importantly, his final years are not defined by fear or chaos, but by connection. Science echoes this truth. Studies published in the Journal of Palliative Medicine show that families who engage in end-of-life planning experience less anxiety, less conflict, and more meaningful time together in those final months and years. Edward avoided the conversation and lost control over how his story ends. Frank faced it head-on and gained the one thing we all crave most at the end: peace. So ask yourself, are you brave enough to plan for the inevitable? Or will you leave your loved ones to pick up the pieces? And so, the question remains, what will your story be? Frank and Edward started in the same place. Two men with the same dreams, the same opportunities, and the same years ahead of them. But the choices they made shaped the lives they now live. Frank walks through his final chapters with a quiet pride. He has his health, his family, his passions, and most of all, peace. There are no lingering regrets, no unsaid words, no broken relationships left in his wake. He lived with intention, and now he ages with grace. Edward, on the other hand, carries the weight of choices he cannot undo. The body he pushed too hard, the family he neglected, the emotions he buried, the dreams he abandoned, and the plans he never made. What once felt like small sacrifices became the regrets that haunt him now. But the truth is, their stories aren't just theirs, they're ours, because we are all walking that same road. Every day, with every decision, we're choosing which ending we'll face: the regrets of a life half-lived, or the peace of a life fully embraced. And the beauty is, you still have time to choose your health before it's taken from you. Time to pick up the phone, to mend what's been broken, to sit at the table and be present. Time to speak the words that matter, while the people you love can still hear them. Time to dust off the dreams you've buried and let them breathe again. And yes, time to face the hard conversations with courage, so that when your final chapter comes, your family is left with love, not chaos. Because in the end, it's not about what you built, but who you became. The question is, what will you regret when your time comes? You can change the ending. Starting today. If this message resonated with you, comment number 7 below. And if you believe it's time for more people to hear the truth, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because these conversations matter, and sometimes they change everything.